Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. We have made it to the large intestine. So, this is the last organ in our GI tract. And remember, the small intestine is actually longer and more expansive, but the large intestine is thicker. So, the large intestine has a diameter that's like 2 times the diameter of the small intestine. So that's how we're getting the term large intestine there. Okay, when we talk about the large intestine, let's talk about it as finishing absorption of water, which remember we said we're absorbing 90% of our water in the small intestine. So there's only a little bit remaining here. And electrolytes. And remember, we also said that we were absorbing like 80% of our electrolytes in the small intestine. So there's not much left here. And then what I think I want to do is list another important job as house our microbiome. So these are bacteria and some fungi that live in our gut, and they do important stuff for us. So we'll actually see that these organisms are important in helping to produce some of our vitamins, and then we can absorb those vitamins across the large intestine. But it's important, I think, to pay attention to the digestion that happens in the large intestine is not our cells. It's the cells that live in our body that do that for us. And then let's say form, store, and eliminate our feces. So that's, of course, the waste material that we're not able to use. When we do talk about the structure of the large intestine, we'll see we've already said it's 2 times the diameter of the small intestine. We'll see that there's no folding here. So there's no plicae circulares, there's no villi, there's no microvilli. This is very smooth. We're going to have a lot of goblet cells that are going to be important in making a lot of mucus. And so this is going to make it easier for that fecal material, which will be pretty solid and pretty compact to move through the large intestine. So I have this same picture of our model in the lab showing, primarily here we're seeing the small intestine, and then kind of wrapped around it in this gray sort of color, we have large intestine. And so here I want to label the appendix. We call this little pocket here where the small intestine empties, the cecum. And then we're going to call this the ascending, you can call it the colon. We have a transverse colon that's kind of almost on top of the small intestine. Then we're going to have a descending colon. On this left side, we have sort of this S-shaped bend. We call that the sigmoid colon. The last like 10 centimeters is called the rectum. And then the opening is, of course, called the anus. There's a little bit more details to the anatomy of the large intestine that you should be picking up in your in your lab class. I'm not going to go into that for lecture. With the appendix, there's been a lot of research and conversation around this particular structure. It's been thought of as a vestigial organ, meaning it's left over and it has no real function for us. And now the current thinking is that this is like a reservoir for our microbiome. So that if you have, you know, gastrointestinal problem, you have a diarrhea and you clean out your large intestine really quickly, you've done a lot of defecating, then you may still have some of these organisms taking up residence in your appendix that can then go back and repopulate the whole large intestine. So there's a lot of new research and data centering these organisms, and some of the thinking is that some of our digestive ailments, including something like an irritable bowel syndrome, could be in some cases connected to the microbiome. We are seeing like trillions of cells of individuals that are living here, and it's thought to be greater than 700 different species, and not all of these have been characterized and identified when we look at these particular organisms. We will see that the organisms are producing for us biotin, which can also be talked about as vitamin B7. And this is important in the utilization or metabolism of our nutrients, our lipids, our carbohydrates, our amino acids. We'll also see these organisms are important in producing vitamin B5, which is going to be important in helping us to make coenzyme A. Coenzyme A you studied when you studied the citric acid cycle. If you remember, pyruvic acid gets converted to acetate or acetate, let's say, and then acetate combines with coenzyme A to make acetyl-CoA, and then that's starting out that citric acid cycle, which is important in making ATP. And then vitamin K, we've mentioned already this semester as being important in our clotting factors, including prothrombin. So without the organisms that live in your gut, you wouldn't have access to these vitamins without taking them as a supplement. We'll also see these organisms are responsible for producing flatulence, which is gas produced as a result of breaking down carbohydrates that you did not break down in your small intestine. So you're kind of feeding those organisms, they're producing some waste products, and then you're getting rid of that with your body. When we look at the when we look at the large intestine, we'll see that there are 3 different types of movements that we'll see. So we're going to see here what's described as haustral contractions. So when we look at the large intestine, you'll see that it's kind of organized into these little bulges, and each one of those little bulges is a haustrum. That's the singular version of the word. And so what we're talking about with the haustral contractions is the haustra contract. We'll see that this will last for about a minute, and this is happening about every 30 minutes. And that's going to move material to the next. And now we'll put haustrum, which is the singular version of the word. And this is helping us to increase our water reabsorption And we're doing a little bit of mixing as we're moving them into each one of those rostrum. We'll also see the movement of a slow peristalsis. And then we have characterized in this large intestine what's called mass movement. And the mass movement is really involved in our defecation reflex, or, what we can think of as a bowel movement. With the mass movement, we can call them strong waves that are going to quickly force material. And here I'm just going to say feces to the rectum. So this is a little bit more aggressive than peristalsis, but it's the same sort of kind of squeezing the toothpaste sort of wave-like action. It's just more aggressive. It's just more aggressive. The other thing I want to say before we get into that defecation reflex, let's take a look back down here at our anus. So I'm zooming in here on the diagram that we have of, it's not a diagram, right? It's an actual picture of a model. And what we're seeing is surrounding the anus, we have skeletal muscle. And we're going to see what is called the external anal sphincter. This is going to be skeletal muscle, which does mean that you are controlling it consciously. And then we have what's called the internal anal sphincter. And let's make a note here that the default is for this to be always closed. So this should always be closed, holding fecal material in the large intestine. So we'll see as part of the defecation response that we will open it. And then the external anal sphincter is the sphincter that you are consciously controlling as part of your defecation. So the internal anal sphincter is like standard operating procedure closed, and that's an unconsciously controlled muscle. And then the external anal sphincter is the one that is consciously being controlled as a part of defecation response. So let us map out what's happening in the defecation reflex. It's important to note that there's really like two. There's a short reflex, and then there's a long reflex. And remember, the difference here is that a short reflex is just localized in that particular area, whereas the long reflex is involving the central nervous system. When we're talking about the short reflex, we're just talking about the myenteric plexus. We're talking about increasing peristalsis. And we'll see that this is very much a positive feedback mechanism, meaning you get fecal material moving into the rectum. As the rectum is stretched or distended, this is going to signal for more peristaltic movement. More fecal material is moving into the rectum, distending the rectum, signaling those stretch receptors, and you're just kind of continuing that at this very localized area. So you're getting that movement, more and more fecal material heading in the direction of the anus. When we look at the long reflex, what we're going to see here is you're getting that mass movement of feces into the rectum. And the rectum is really like the last 10 centimeters of the large intestine. And this is going to stimulate stretch receptors, as we've already said. And in the long reflex, that signal makes its way to the spinal cord. Now, once we have a signal at the spinal cord, we're going to get kind of like two pathways. So we're going to get a response coordinated by the parasympathetic division, parasympathetic neurons. are going to do like three things. They're going to do increase peristalsis, or you can think of that as your mass movement, right? Increase the movement. You're going to relax the internal anal sphincter. So remember, that's the one we said the default is it's always closed. So now we need to relax it. So now we're getting very close to our exit. And so what we're going to see is that as part of this response, we're going to contract or close the external anal sphincter. So it's kind of like there's two doors. There's the internal door and the external door. The internal door is always closed until this response here opens it. And because it's open and the feces can leave, then we need to shut that outer door. So we shut that outer door. We said this signal goes to the spinal cord, and from there it is going to go up to our conscious, I'm just going to say higher center. So it's going to our cerebrum, where we become consciously aware, and then we're allowed to do the conscious relaxation of the external anal sphincter, which then is actually defecation. Or not. Or not. So if you're not in a situation where you can go, you can hold it. And that's going to stop the signaling. Fecal material is going to move out of the rectum back into the large intestine. And the longer that fecal material is in the large intestine, the more water is reabsorbed. And so the fecal material can get very hard. And this can lead to, of course, constipation and trouble defecating. All right, y'all. Up next, we're ready to look at some of those accessory organs. And as always, take care of yourselves and each other.